All right, CNN breaking news. We have breaking news. This is hot off the presses. Khamzat Chimaev booked to main event against one Leon Edwards in December on a fight night. Matt, first thoughts when this news crossed your path?
What the hell was my first, I believe, initial reaction, right? Because the UFC has effectively backed Leon Edwards into this corner by taking him off of the rankings for all of what, 48 hours? And within that span, not only does he now have a fight, but he is magically back into the rankings at number 3 after this fight announcement has come back. So let's just talk about, I guess, the absurdity that is this matchup, because Leon Edwards, as I just mentioned, ranked number 3 in the division, currently on an 8-fight win streak in the division, is now matched up with a guy who is 3 fights into the UFC and has only had 1 fight at 170. But hey, now he's facing essentially for the number 1 contendership in that division, in a division, by the way, which is not short on talent. So I get that Chimaev is this guy that everybody loves. He's the hottest thing in MMA. You ask that to, pretty much anybody that pays and watches this sport on a weekly basis. They all are in unison and agreement with Chimaev is the next biggest thing. The next biggest thing doesn't get a number 1 contendership 2 fights in, at least in 2020 in the UFC.
In the welterweight division at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, this just screams of horrible, horrible, horrible matchmaking and ridiculously shady business practices right here. None of which surprised me at all. I mean, I think from a matchmaking standpoint, the UFC has continually shot itself in the foot by kind of killing off contenders at the wrong times and not making the matchups that fans really wanted to see for some of the quite frankly silly reasons, or just simply to remain compliant with this ridiculous schedule that they're on and just trying to fit bodies in wherever they can at the expense of the actual fights that should be going on. So to pair Leon Edwards, who really should be fighting for the title, he should be rematching Kamaru Usman for the UFC welterweight title. Or at the very least, he should be fighting a top name or top contender. Anybody under Jorge Masvidal shouldn't even he shouldn't even waste his time with. Quite frankly, if it's not Jorge Masvidal, if it's not Colby Covington, why are we even doing this? If you're Leon Edwards, so it's pretty disgusting to see that they backed him in the corner. And I think another aspect to this that I find particularly disturbing, removing him from the rankings, one. There have been plenty of other people with longer bouts of inactivity that still remain on the rankings. Nina Ansaroff comes to mind. I know she's currently still ranked. I mean, Conor McGregor, Jesus, he's still ranked at lightweight, and he hasn't won a fight at lightweight since UFC 205. Has not competed in the division since UFC 229 in 2018. We are in the final stretch of 2020 here, and yet this man is still ranked as top of the lightweight division. So the inconsistency is just ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Um, and then on top of that, to have him, uh, this man who was actually booked in March, he was booked in March. It wasn't like he's been turning down fights after fight after fight for a year and some change. This man was supposed to fight in March. And who was he supposed to fight? Tyron Woodley, who just held the belt and was coming back for his first fight since losing that title. So welcoming a former champion back to the octagon in what should have been, at least for him, a number 1 contendership. And now you go from that to a man whose only win in the UFC's welterweight division was against a guy who was making his debut.
It's funny
Make it
because,
make sense.
well, listen, not only was he scheduled to fight Woodley in March, but why was that fight scratched?
Oh,
Oh,
probably the global pandemic.
Yeah, just a tiny thing of a global pandemic that is flaring up again, as we were supposed to have our second wave hit towards the end of summer. We are now just now hitting, the second flare up as winter starts because we have incompetent leadership in this country. That's another topic for another day. So, and I also remember that once this whole thing started up, I remember Dana White saying something to the effect of, he was understanding and, of fighters that weren't able to, put together camps and get ready for fights. And he would, wouldn't necessarily take it out on them if they couldn't fight as the pandemic was, raging on. Apparently that's changed because, hey, Leon Edwards, you're not fighting, so you're out of the rankings, which affects pay, which affects negotiating power, everything like that. As we all say on, hashtag MMA Twitter, right? Like rankings don't make sense. Rankings are fake. Rankings are a joke or whatever. But rankings have power when it comes to the negotiating table behind the scenes for these guys. So it's pretty important to have a number next to your name when you're talking about money, which is really why we're all here in the first place, right?
Right.
Anybody that says they're here for the sporting aspect of it and nothing else, they're lying to you, or they're lying to themselves. Like at the end of the day, you're trying to put money in your pocket and put food on the table for your families. So to say that rankings aren't significant, that's not entirely true. So it is important. But we are now in this position because of the UFC apparently starting to strong arm people to step into the cage, that Leon Edwards is now forced to take a fight against a guy that is not ranked and has only had one fight in the division just because he's got a lot of hype behind him. And, I think back, I did a little bit of research on, who was the fastest to the title, right? Fastest fighter to the title ever in the UFC was Anderson Silva. His second fight in the UFC, he got a title shot against Rich Franklin. That was in 2006 when the UFC had 18 events that calendar year. They have 18 events damn near in 2 months now. It's a completely different world. The roster has tripled in size since then. It's a whole different beast. You know what I mean? So those days should be long gone. You should at least have 3 or 4 fights under your belt before we're even talking about top 5 contendership.
Right. And
in
even
most divisions, there's some divisions you can fast track that, but
Right.
170, nah.
Come on. And when you're talking about Anderson Silva getting his title shot when he did, at the time, he was such a proven commodity in MMA. He had been through Pride, he had been through Cage Rage, the Rumble on the Rock tournament. He competed in. Like he had already proven himself to be an elite force at 185. So this is a different thing. We're talking about a guy who just bounced off a regional promotion.
Yeah.
And while he has captured the imagination of a lot of people, and he is an exciting person to watch, he is obviously a very talented man, and he could very well go on to do exciting things. He very well could go on to beat Leon Edwards. If we're being honest, it is very possible. But he hasn't earned the spot to get in front of that man yet.
No, he hasn't earned it. He has not earned it.
That's what it is.
And as I mentioned a second ago, Leon Edwards is on an 8-fight win streak. Khamzat Chimaev is about to enter his 10th pro fight overall total. They're 2 fights separated right there. So it's kind of crazy to think that Leon Edwards, who's won 8 straight in the UFC, Chimaev has won 3 in the UFC in 2 different divisions. 2 of them are at the higher weight division. That's why I think this fight is actually kind of intriguing, because he's fighting in the lower division for this fight. And obviously the stylistic clash is there, whatever have you. But like you just said, he hasn't earned it. You have to earn that right to step into the octagon against the number 3 ranked fighter in that division. We've only had 1 fight in that division. There's been other fighters in the past, sure, where we're like, we see him, we see the eye test, we'll be like, oh, he could compete against this guy ranked at whatever. Still got to climb the ladder. Still got to climb the ladder. Especially, it's just more disgusting when it's like you literally strong-armed Leon Edwards into taking this fight. And people are pointing to all the fights that Leon has kind of turned down, against Wonder Boy or against Colby Covington. Listen, there's reasons going on in the world, like you said.
Yeah,
it's all disgusting to me.
Believe the stories though, like that. If Dana White gets on the mic and says this guy turned down a fight, we've heard him say that in the most ridiculous of situations. So I think at this point we're just this is fanboy mentality right here to just ride with whatever the boss says when the boss has been proven to lie in these specific circumstances. So I'm just not understanding what's so hard to understand about this. This is a terrible situation. And then on top of that, beyond how the screw job that's being applied to Leon Edwards here, let's talk about the potential screw job that's being applied to Khamzat Chimaev.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, there is a method to the madness when it comes to building up a prospect into a contender, into a champion. This doesn't just happen because you like this guy. It happens over time. It happens over careful matchmaking. Um, it is, granted, he seems to be a special sort of talent. And I think last time we've talked about him, at least me and you have, in in one of these segments here. It's like, hey, well, the hype behind him feels more like it did with Conor McGregor or Israel Adesanya, people who clearly had the talent to back up the level of hype, but there still were stepping stones
Yeah.
before. When Israel Adesanya touched his first main event, it was against Brad Tavares, who a guy who perennially hangs around the lower half of the top 15 in the division.
Definition of a gatekeeper, no disrespect. Yes,
Right, none,
100%.
none whatsoever. But he is Brad Tavares was his test for the first main event. Was his test to jump to the Derek Brunsons of the world, to jump to the Anderson Silvas. That was the purpose of that fight. You cannot skip that step. I'm sorry, no disrespect to Gerald Mearshart, but he is not that guy. And this is a different weight class on top of that. Um, so here's what the UFC is setting itself up with: a huge, huge, huge gamble that can blow up in their face. And still, at the end of the day, Leon Edwards doesn't. Even if he wins in spectacular fashion, well, this guy was so new. He's unranked. You were supposed to do that, and he's back to square one, waiting for the title shot that he earned probably 2 or 3 fights ago. Then, if what I think happens, oh, the UFC really stepped in it this time. If Leon Edwards goes in there and does what he does to everybody that they put in front of him the past 8 times, well, they got some egg on their face. If that man goes in there and outclasses Khamzat Chimaev, your hype train has been derailed. Your careful planning of a star that built up to a John Jones record-setting title reign, to an Israel Adesanya who very well could do that same thing, to a Conor McGregor becoming a global superstar, has now officially hit a brick wall. Not saying he can't recover, but this is an unnecessary roadblock as far as proper development of a fighter. This is just the worst matchmaking you could ever imagine right here.
No, 1,000%. And like you mentioned, Conor McGregor, it took him 6 fights before he got that matchup against Jose Aldo. And their promotion was putting so much power behind him already, giving him main events in Ireland, in Dublin. Like, it's just like they knew that was their guy, but they did it carefully, right? He had all the marketing, all the hype in the world behind him, but they brought him along slowly. 6 fights before he got to Jose Aldo, right?
Mhm.
To do this, to put like Chimaev against the corner as well, like you were mentioning, to tag onto that, let's just say something happens to Leon Edwards and he cannot make this date. Say he gets injured in training. Well, now you've pigeonholed Chimaev into facing a top 5 opponent because you're essentially saying I'm top 5 worthy. Okay, well, who happens to be ready around that same time? All right, you're in there against Colby Covington. Good job, like UFC. Now you are really forcing your hand at putting this guy in there against a wrestler who has a relentless, like never empty gas tank in Colby Covington. Like, that's who you're saying he's worthy of fighting now. When you say we're going to book him against Leon Edwards. So, I hope Leon makes the date. I don't want to say anything like that because I want to see Leon go out there and prove that he belongs where he belongs. And all of this time away doesn't mean that he's like been ducking or dodging anybody, because, there's people out there saying that as well. On the flip side of that, I hope Chimaev also doesn't have this thing happen, because I've been a fan of his. Obviously, we're here at CNN, the Chimaev News Network, right? Where I want to see this dude succeed. Like, I was intrigued ever since they called that dude Khabib 2.0, and he went out there and looked like Khabib at 185, right? That's what he looked like in that first outing. To put a loss on this man right now, when he's got all of the hype behind him in the world, is just completely irresponsible for the promotion. And, a matchmaker once said that I can schedule you a loss, no matter who you are. I can schedule you a loss, given our rosters. I hope that's what the promotion wasn't thinking, or the matchmakers weren't thinking right here, that they were just going to put a loss on Leon Edwards that easily. Because this is kind of like, I also went back to that quote in my mind. I was like, were they really thinking that Leon Edwards is that much of a pushover? To say, like, I mean, I guess, you see the dominating wrestling, you see like the confidence on 100, you see the one punch knockout of Gerald Meerschaert. Do they really think that's going to happen to Leon Edwards too? Because that's what you're telling me right now when you're scheduling this fight.
Yeah, that's exactly what that says. I mean, keep in mind, this is the same person who they booked 2 fights for at the same time. At least they attempted to. So
And they
they
moved to do it again too. Yeah.
yeah, trying to do it again. Like, I'm actually reminded of something. You just sparked a different thought in my brain here. Forgive me if I have the event number wrong. I believe it was UFC 207 or 208, where Amanda Nunes knocked out Ronda Rousey. The stories that we were hearing about from backstage at that event, where apparently the WME IMG executives that were so happy to have Ronda Rousey back in the cage and could see the buckets of money that were coming their way, just thought that this Nunes girl, she's just a nuisance. Ronda would get her out of there. Hence all the marketing being slanted toward Ronda's favor. Barely a mention of the actual champion. And then when Nunes went out there and did work and absolutely annihilated Ronda Rousey, a lot of people with egg on their face, a lot of people scratching their heads wondering what happened. Well, what happened is you put somebody in a fight that they were going to lose. And this is potentially what's happening right now. Chimaev could, maybe he goes out there and he just steamrolls Leon Edwards, and we're having a much different conversation post-fight, perhaps. But considering the resume that Leon Edwards has, considering what we've seen him do in the cage, we've seen him outbox tremendous strikers. We've seen him put it to Donald Cerrone over the course of 5 rounds. We've seen him out-grapple Gunnar Nelson. We've seen him outwork Rafael Dos Anjos. We've seen this man do everything to everybody but the champion Kamaru Usman. And quite frankly, if that fight were rebooked, it might go a little differently today. It just might. It might be something different. We're talking about that man being put up against someone who is, however entertaining, however charismatic, however much he captures the imagination, is an unproven commodity.
Yeah. And listen, as much as I want to see Chimaev succeed here, like I said earlier today, he very well could be champion of this division this time next year. But you know what you can do within that time of now and next year? You can put him in fights that climb him up the ladder slowly. You don't have to put him in against the number 3 in a month. Like they put him against number 15. After that, give him number 5 or number 3 after that. If he goes out there and dominates the number 10 guy or whatever, then put him against the top 2 or 3 guy. There's ways to do it. Just to skip the line like this is so crazy to me. And it's just that perfect storm of them wanting to push a guy to the moon with the rocket strapped to the back, and the guy that they're really kind of on the outs on when it comes to trying to force him to get back in the cage. And I really do wonder what the timeline was with Leon Edwards sending that tweet out saying, "Hey, Chimaev, you want to fight?" Like, was that contract already sent when he sent that tweet out? Because if that tweet prompted that contract being drafted, like, that's even more egregious right there.
Right. I mean, eh, however you slice it, however the timeline breaks down, the end result is the same. Leon Edwards was bullied into doing something that is against his best interest in his career. And quite frankly, isn't in the best interest of the UFC. It just isn't. This is this is stupid. And I know that's a word I use a lot, but I think this is an appropriate time to break that word out. This is just stupid. There's no rhyme or reason to this other than we really like Chimaev and we really want him to be a star. So let's go ahead and grab this crowbar and force him in there. It's a piece that just may not fit. I'll tell you one thing: if it doesn't fit, if Chimaev is not ready for the number three ranked welterweight in the world, it will be either a really long or a really short night for him.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that can happen on the night of this fight. I just hate that this fight is being made at the end of the day. Like, that's my biggest takeaway is I hate this matchmaking right now. Like we said at the very top of this video, man, it just does not make sense. It really does not. You could have completely gone about this a different way that benefits both fighters involved in this matchup. But here we are with just, it's kind of like the storm of 2020, right? Where we're closing out the year on a fight that makes no sense.
This is 2020 right here.
Yeah.